How could it be? This baby in my arms, sleeping now so peacefully. The Son of God, the angel said, how could it be? Father, show me where I fit into this plan of yours. How can a man be father to the Son of God? Lord, for all my life, I've been a simple carpenter. How can I raise a king? How can I raise a king? Lord, I know he's not my own, not of my flesh, not of my bone. Still, Father, let this baby be the son of my love. Father, show me where I fit into this plan of yours. How can a man be father to the mighty God? Lord, for all my life, I've been a simple carpenter. How can I raise a king? How can I raise a king? How could it be? This baby in my arms, sleeping now so peacefully. The mighty God, the prophet said, how could it be? How could it be? How could it be? You know, even after nearly 2,000 years on the other side and seeing Jesus in all of his glory, I still marvel and wonder, how could it be that the glorious God, the mighty God, would come to earth and be wrapped in the flesh of a baby boy? And that I could be part of that story. Oh, I love the Christmas story. Oh, not because of the focus that's put on me, although I suspect this is the one time a year that many people think of me. In fact, I bet that some of you even have little statues of me in your home this week. Oh, and probably next week you'll wrap me in plastic and put me back in the box and store me away for another year. Oh, not that I mind, because the focus ought never to be on me or anyone else, but only on that wonderful child. You know, these statues of me, I look so holy and serene. Sometimes even have a halo over my head on these statues. I look so calm and dignified. But I'll tell you what, I wasn't very calm and dignified that night. My wife had just had a baby, and I had to help deliver him. I mean, dads, how calm and dignified were you when you had your first child? And you even had doctors to help you, and your wife probably had some pain medicine to help her. Back then, it was just Mary and I. And even though this child was God's gift to the world, he was born just like every other child with the childbearing pains and all. You know, you can sing all you want to about a silent night. But let me tell you, that night wasn't very silent with Mary and her cries of childbirth. And when Jesus was born, again, you can sing about little Lord Jesus, no crying he made. But I'll tell you what, Jesus cried just as vigorously as any other baby born. It wasn't a silent night, but it was indeed a holy night. And I never get tired of thinking back to that night. Oh, the majesty of it all. The story of the shepherds. Shepherds who came to Mary and I and said that they had seen angels out in the field and that angels were celebrating the birth of our son. On the other side, I've talked to some of those angels and they had such delight that night. No, I never get tired of talking about that magic night when the mighty God became flesh. I have to be honest, though, I didn't always think that child was very wonderful. Heck, let me tell you my story. My dad, his name is Jacob, and he is a great man of God. He always feared God, and he taught me as a young age to fear God. He was proud of his namesake Jacob. All Jews can trace their lineage back to Jacob. But my family, we could also trace our lineage back to David himself. I was a direct descendant of King David. And so when I was growing up, David was my hero. I loved hearing my dad tell me stories of David and all of his exploits and all the things that God did with him. In fact, when my friends and I would play, we would play David. When we'd play hide and seek, we'd pretend that we were David hiding from King Saul or from his other enemies. And when we'd play battle, it was always against the Philistines. I loved it when I got to be David and I got to be the one that got to slay Goliath the giant. Oh, we must have played that scene hundreds of times growing up as a kid. So you can just imagine my excitement when my dad would tell me over and over, Joseph, someday somebody's going to come that will be even greater than David. He'll be the Messiah. And he will be greater than David. Oh, I can remember my dad would tell me that over and over. Every Passover, when we'd sit around the table, he would say something like this: Joseph, don't forget that the Messiah is going to come someday. And when the Messiah comes and lives with us, he will make everything right. I wish I knew then what I know about the Messiah now. Like everyone else, I expected the Messiah to be born in a palace. After all, we had heard that prophecy from Isaiah when he talked about the Messiah, and he said that of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end, and he will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that day on and forever. And so, of course, we expected the Messiah to be born in the palace because he would be a king. He would reign on David's throne. We believed he'd be a mighty warrior that would come in and restore Israel to a place of prominence like it was in David's day. We were hoping the Messiah would come and overthrow the Romans who were occupying Israel at the time. I have to admit that even though I loathed the Romans, I didn't really think the Messiah would come in my lifetime. Well, let me get back to the story. My dad, he's a carpenter, and he taught me to be a carpenter. And I loved being a carpenter. In fact, the master uses me as a carpenter even on the other side. And when I was good enough to be a carpenter of my own, it became time for us to think about a wife. Now, you men today have it pretty easy. When you want to get married, all you have to do is find somebody willing to marry you. But it wasn't so easy in my day. In my day, it was pretty much a business transaction between me and my parents and the bride-to-be and her parents. You see, we had to pay for our wives in the form of a dowry. We had to give a gift to the bride's parents. How much would you be willing to pay for your wife? I thought Mary, my bride-to-be, was worth every shekel of that dowry. I mean, not only was she beautiful, but she was innocent and sweet, and she loved the mighty God and feared the mighty God. I mean, what more could you want in a wife? And so Mary and I were engaged. Now, according to tradition, that meant that I would go back to my dad's house and I would begin to build a place for Mary and I to live. Now, being a carpenter, that was an easy thing for me to build a house, but I was confident that Mary would make it into a home. And so I began the work. I did most of the work myself, inspecting every little detail, because even though we were poor, I wanted Mary to have the best that I could give to her. And once the house was done, then we'd be able to get married. It was during that engagement time that Mary came to me and said she was going to go to Jerusalem to visit a relative of hers, an old woman named Elizabeth, who of all things was pregnant. Again, I didn't believe it at first. I mean, women her age just don't get pregnant. But as Mary told the story, she said that Elizabeth's husband, a man named Zechariah, who was a priest in the temple, was in the temple one day, and an angel of God appeared to him and told him that his old wife was going to have a baby. Well, he didn't believe it either. And I'm told he couldn't speak for a while because of that. I mean, it was quite a tale. I didn't know what to make of it. Angels announcing special births. But there was no denying it. Elizabeth was pregnant, and she was going to have a child, and so Mary was going to go and visit with her and help her with the childbirth and with the new baby. I can remember the day that Mary left. She had that twinkle in her eye and told me that she loved me, and I told her that I loved her, and then I said, Mary, when you come back, our place will be about finished, and we'll be able to get married, and then we'll know the joy of having children of our own. And with that thought, she was gone. Gone for 3 long months. I busied myself getting our place ready, imagining even as I was working of the sound of laughter of children and Mary and I raising a family together. The days were long and I missed her every day. But after 3 months, she came back and she still had that twinkle in her eye, but something was different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at the time. But she came to me and said, Joseph, we need to talk privately about something really serious. I couldn't imagine what that might be, so we went off to talk, and I can still hear her saying it. Joseph, I love you so much, and I don't want to lose you, and I don't understand everything that's happened, but you need to know I'm pregnant. My mouth just dropped. I was stunned. I was speechless. Mary had always been the epitome of innocence and purity. And now she's pregnant. My shock turned to just genuine hurt. And with tears in my eyes, I looked at her and said, Mary, how could you do this? How could you do this to me, to us? We had our whole life in front of us. How could you do this? And she said, well, Joseph, it's not what you think. You know, this child, he's from God. I swear to you, I haven't been with another man. And with that, my hurt turned to anger. I mean, not been with another man? I mean, what does she think I am? I know where babies come from. I mean, would you believe her? Would you believe it? Your fiance goes away for 3 months, comes back pregnant, and says she hasn't been fooling around? Well, I didn't believe her. I was so hurt and angry that I just ran away. Just left her standing there. I was so confused, so hurt. I could hardly pray. And I cried out to God to help me to understand. I didn't know what to do. I mean, my dad, he had always taught me to be a righteous man and to live according to the word of Yahweh, according to what the mighty God had said. And the law was pretty clear. The law said that if a man is pledged to be married to a woman and proof is given that she's not a virgin, and being pregnant is pretty good proof, it says that woman is to be stoned. Now, I knew I didn't want that for Mary. So I wondered, what could I do? I prayed and contemplated, and finally I decided I would just go to the priest and just ask for a certificate of divorce. You see, back in those days, even though we were just engaged and hadn't yet been married, to call it off still required an official divorce document. So I thought I'd go to the priest and ask for that divorce. I wouldn't mention anything about Mary's pregnancy because I didn't want to disgrace her or her family. And I figured at least that way, Mary could go to the father of her child and at least the two of them could have a happy life together. But just before I was going to go to the priest, the strangest thing happened. I was laying in bed and I think it was a dream, but I'm not even sure. It wasn't real. I had a vision of an angel that appeared to me and called me by name. And the angel said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. And she will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he'll save his people from their sins. When I awoke, I was just dumbfounded. An angel appearing to me? Was that same angel that Mary talked about, that had appeared to her and told her that this pregnancy would be from God? I can't begin to tell you how my mind just began to race. I mean, could it be? How could it be? The Messiah in Mary's womb? The mighty God? And then it struck me like a ton of bricks. How many times had I heard my dad speak of the Messiah from the prophet Isaiah? And the prophet had said, the virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel. Did you hear that? The virgin. The virgin will be with child. Just like my Mary, a virgin will be with child. And they'll call him Emmanuel. Emmanuel means God with us. How could it be? The mighty God. And then I remembered Isaiah in that same scroll, in talking about the one that would be born of the virgin, said that he would be called the Wonderful Counselor and the Mighty God and the Everlasting Father and the Prince of Peace. That was the child that was to be born. The mighty God in Mary's womb. At that, I just fell to my knees in wonder and awe at what God was doing, as well as being just a little bit frightened. I'm not sure I wanted to have an encounter with the mighty God. There's another story we learned as children about David that always scared me a little bit. It was a story that we didn't act out as kids because it was frightening. It was a story about the Ark of the Covenant, that sacred spot for the Jews where the mighty God would come and visit his people. Maybe you remember that story. David, before the temple was built, where the Ark would ultimately be rest, David was bringing that Ark into Jerusalem. And the mighty God had said it's only to be carried on the shoulders of the priest, but David didn't realize that, and he was bringing it on a cart, and the oxen stumbled, and there was a man who reached out and steadied the ark, and the mighty God struck him dead. And we learned as kids, you don't trifle with a mighty God like that. We learned that just a few years earlier, 70 men had looked into the ark when they were told not to, and the mighty God struck them down. Do I really want an encounter with that God? The mighty God had said that no one could see him and live. And yet, in just a while, I would hold in my arms the mighty God. I would look into the face of this child and I would see the face of God. How could it be? As I thought about that, there was one question that just kept coming back. Why me? Why Mary? God, why us? I'm not anybody special. I'm not a priest or a prophet. I'm not a king. God, I'm just a carpenter. Why us? Why me? I'm still not sure the answer to that. I think sometimes it's because God wanted us to know that it is to us a child is given, and to us a son is born. To all of us, poor folk like Mary and I, rich folk like these kings that came to visit the baby once he had been born, to us the child is given. You know, I don't have to tell you that Mary was thrilled when I told her about my dream of the angel. I mean, we wept and laughed and embraced, and then we wept and laughed some more. And I told her I was sorry for not believing her about the story. And Mary, gracious as she always was, just told me how hard it must have been for me to hear that story. And then together we prepared for the birth of our child. I say our child, but we both knew that I would be a step-parent. You know, I would like to say that it was easy after that, but it really wasn't. I mean, I still had doubts. You know, I still wondered sometimes, you know, how do you father the everlasting Father? How do you raise the mighty God? But every time I'd have those doubts, Mary, in just her sweet way, would just remind me that God chose us. You know, God is with us, and that God would provide for us, and that we could just trust Him, that no matter what came, that God would be with us. And again, so He was through all of the ordeal of about going to Egypt and everything else. God just always provided, just like Mary would remind me. You know, you know the rest of the story. I mean, you've heard it many times about that census and all, and going to Bethlehem. You know, we dreaded going to Bethlehem. I mean, Mary was 9 months pregnant. I mean, ladies, can you imagine walking or riding a donkey for miles to get to Bethlehem? But for some reason, God, in His wisdom, said He wanted His child born in Bethlehem, and so to Bethlehem we went. But as He always did, He provided for us. You know, many poor folk like us had to just sleep out in the open fields outside of Jerusalem. You know, at least we had a stable over our heads and a place to lay the baby. I'll never forget the amazement at looking at baby Jesus in these strips of linen. That's all we had, laying in this feeding trough. And I thought, that's the mighty God who made the wood that He's lying on. That's the mighty God who created all things wrapped in flesh. You can understand why I sing, how could it be? How could it be? You know, the one thing that I just don't think I'll ever understand is why God would do any of this in the first place. Why would God leave His glory? Why would God, where He's adored and worshiped by all of these angels, why would God come and live among us? I mean, why would He care about mere mortals like you and I? After all, He's the mighty God. And we're the ones who rebelled against Him and walked away from Him. We're the ones who did that separation. He could have just left us on our own. Why would He come and live among us? Remember that story I told you about the ark? You know, that sacred box for the Jews? Do you know that once a year, the high priest would go and put blood on that Ark of the Covenant. And that blood would make atonement for the sins of all the people for that entire year. It's called the Day of Atonement. That's why Jesus came. So that he could make atonement with his own blood. So that all our sins and transgressions could be paid. Friends, the manger of Bethlehem would lead to the cross of Calvary. And that is the hope of Christmas. That's why the mighty God came. So that you might know his love. That the Christmas story, it's not just something that we celebrate once a year. It's not just when we place our nativity scenes up, but that the Christmas story is something that God gives us for the entire year. That now we can have a relationship with the mighty God. A relationship that is rooted in his love and grace. And friends, that story, again, is for all of us. No matter who you are, no matter where you've been, no matter what sin you've committed, no matter how far you may have run from God, no matter what it is, you are precious to the King. That's why he came. And that, friends, is the hope of Christmas.